precision, watch investors collide.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Fundraising, a podcast where we interview top early stage investors to get all the tips, tricks, and tidbits that you as a fundraising founder wish that you knew about the fundraising process. This is especially going to be valuable for early stage founders that have never done this before. If you haven't listened to the format, we break it down into a few different parts, but we start first with our guest. And today I have a very special guest, Jake Storm, GP of Felicis. You've probably heard of them. I think we just launched our Black Flag 100 list today. And you were certainly, I think, in the top 10 of early stage companies or founders that were invested by you. So it's always great to chat. Thank you for being on today. Could you start a little bit with a background on the fund, what you're investing in, average check size, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, amazing. Well, first off, thanks for having me. Love the podcast. So Felicis interestingly means good fortune in Latin. And we really believe that fortune favors the brave. And obviously founders are the bravest of them all. And so what we do is we are early stage investors. That can mean anything from, seed, where it's 2 guys in a deck, all the way up to kind of like early growth. And so we just closed our 10th fund last year, which is 900 million. It's our largest ever. And we invest anywhere from kind of like, let's call it 2 or 3 million at the low end, all the way up to 40 to 50 million initially at the high end. We have a few core focus areas. We're all generalists, so anybody can invest in everything. But at the end of the day, we're very focused on kind of AI apps and infra, cybersecurity, national resilience, which we would bucket as like advanced manufacturing, defense, energy, et cetera. And then lastly, kind of like health tech and biotech. And so those are kind of the core focus areas. We're most well known for investing in companies like Shopify, Plaid, Canva, Adyen, and then more recently, of course, companies like Notion, Mercor, Runway, Supabase, and many, many others. But we're very excited about this stage of the market that we're at.
I love it. I think that's what's unique about what you guys are doing is you do invest at such a broad spectrum, especially on the check size and industry. You're opportunistic, but that has allowed you to invest in some of the best companies over the last decade. So congrats on that. Excited to dive in a little bit more on your background. What were you doing before you were an investor?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I took a winding road to get into venture. So I actually initially started in enterprise software sales, first at Qualtrics and then at Zuora. And I always loved kind of the chase. I always loved meeting new people and kind of just like, it's a very dynamic role. And I think that what's interesting is you're always trying to understand what is their problem and kind of how can you best solve their problem for them. And like, as opposed to, and I always took a different point of view, which instead of saying, how can I force you to purchase something that's beneficial to me? It's like, how can I actually help you solve a problem that you already have and find a way to make it work for everybody? And so that was kind of where I first started. I say half sales, half finance. I did a few years in investment banking. I actually worked on Zuora's IPO and several others. And then I've been in venture now for about 8.5 years. And interestingly, venture is an incredible role. I love what I do. It's half finance. So it basically is the good side of both of the other jobs. So I just love what I do.
Yeah, really quick question before we go deeper. I always see that there's this weird dynamic between folks that had an operating background as a VC versus more of a finance background. Do you think, and we don't even have to keep this in, but have you seen anything that, like, what path do you think works better? Is there a better path you think for maybe potential investors that are out there on which background maybe suits or fits better for this role?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I initially came into later stage venture, which was much more well suited if you're coming from finance, because there's actually something you can offer. Much of the time you're doing metrics driven investing versus kind of a narrative driven approach, which is mostly what early stage is. And so I think that it really depends kind of like what the end goal is. If you really like growth stage or late stage venture, then, going the finance route is very applicable. And there's a lot that is relevant there. On the early stage side, it really depends kind of what your role is. A lot of people come from the product or engineering side. And one thing I'm very careful of is overfitting my experience on what I think the companies should be doing or how I interact with the companies. I think that oftentimes venture investors, they have phenomenal experience and there are a ton of things you can apply from that experience. But I think that especially now with AI, we're seeing that everything is changing so dynamically. that at the end of the day, what prepares you the most is kind of having that like mental elasticity to continue to work with new companies, new business models, new sectors over time, as opposed to just kind of like force fitting your own personal experience on any one of those.
Yep, that's a great answer. I'm trying to think of you mentioned this earlier. I feel like we do have like one of the best jobs in the world. It's not always easy, but founders want to know what are some of the things that you enjoy most about the job and what are some of the things that maybe you wish founders knew that aren't as good and some of your least favorite parts about the job.
So I would say on the favorite part of the job, honestly, is when you have a thesis or you have kind of like conviction in something happening, be it a trend or some specific way of like a different company working out, and you see that and it's crystal clear, and then it kind of like unrolls before your very eyes and you see that happen. And in many cases, sometimes, so that can come either in two ways. That can either come from you having a prepared mind where maybe there's a space or a subsector that you believe in, or if you have a first meeting with a founder who's clearly seen something ahead of their time that the market hasn't, and that moment when you feel that asymmetry, knowing you're hearing something that people will really dismiss for the next 12 or 18 months. That is honestly just such an incredible, I would almost call it a drug because it's so fun. And that's the real dopamine of the job. I would say my least favorite is honestly like you meet so many great people and great founders, and there are oftentimes like we are just unable to invest for different reasons, whether maybe there's a portfolio conflict, maybe it's just not the right place or right time. And so I think that like passing is my least favorite part of the job because I know that at the end of the day, founders are putting their heart and soul into everything they have into the companies. So that has to be my least favorite by far.
Kind of in a similar vein, is there anything that you wish founders maybe better understood about the job? Certain things that maybe they wouldn't get and you wish they had a better understanding of?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, like venture investors are not the customer, right? Like I consider us like you can think of us as a fuel source, as maybe a potential guide in many cases because we work with many different companies, and so the actual game is like whether you can sell to relevant buyers, hire great talent, ship faster than kind of the competition. So I would say that like oftentimes the roles are often they can reverse those roles mentally. And I think that at the end of the day, we're just a support function and rocket fuel. And the best founders, they kind of come to investors with like a very concrete, hey, here's how you can help and here's how I want to partner with you, as opposed to like, hey, let's nail this pitch and like convince them. So again, it actually goes back to the first answer at the beginning around sales, which is how can we work more closely kind of in a collaborative way versus like one person trying to sell another person. I just think that's a fundamental misunderstanding.
That's a great answer. And we've had other folks say the same thing where founders spend, months fundraising. And at that point, your customer is VCs or are VCs, but then you have to kind of flip a switch and go back to selling to your actual customer, which sometimes can be harder than you think. Because obviously VCs care about very different outcomes and things. Similar to that question, what are some of the things that you are personally most excited about right now? You mentioned that you're generalist and opportunistic and invest across a lot of different areas, but is there anything in this particular moment that you're really excited about right now?
Yeah, so I would say that the way to think about what we do at Felicis and our approach is we are always going to have some level of opportunistic, right? Where it's like we're always talking with people and we always want to meet great founders. We also are strong believers in having prepared minds. And so one of the areas that I think at this point is undeniable is AI's impact on the enterprise. And how do you think about not just like the foundation, but how do you actually enable that? How do you secure that? All of kind of the second order effects of AI. So it could be anything from like, securing AI itself, where, they need to know, enterprises need to know answer to questions like, what do my agents have access to? What are the second order effects of moving this quickly in a non-deterministic fashion? And securing AI is a necessary step. It's not sufficient alone. So there are also things like how do we leverage AI in kind of in cybersecurity, for example. So it's like, I'll give you one example is the status quo is that the average security analyst will process something like 1,000 alerts per day and they ignore 70% of them. And that's not a hiring problem. It's actually a structural failure of legacy architecture. And so the problem is AI powered attackers, they don't wait for enterprise procurement timelines. They're moving as quickly as possible. And so what we've noticed is that obviously every decade or so, the platform shift kind of rewrites the infrastructure and security stack. So cloud did it, mobile did it, obviously internet did it. So now AI is doing it, but it feels much faster than any previous wave. So I would say that's one. Then the other one I would say is like we're spending a lot of time in what we call national resilience. Again, things like advanced manufacturing, energy, defense. And this is really one of when we talk about tailwinds or kind of waves, investing behind waves, like there are multiple waves concurrently driving kind of a lot of the spending in these categories. And so I would say these are probably the two. Enterprise AI and national resilience are the two areas that we're spending a lot of time in.
Those are great areas that I think are going to continue, obviously, to grow massively over the next few years. Last question here before we dive into the fundraising process. It's kind of a way for you to talk freely about why founders should pick you to be on their cap table.
Yeah. What we really focus on internally is speed, conviction, and founder focus, right? And for us, it's like we want to do everything we can to make the founder successful. It all comes down to improving the odds, right? Founders want better odds of success. And like I mentioned, Felicis means good fortune in Latin. And so we want to be the most trusted. We want to make our founders unbreakable. And we want to be there in critical moments. There are many examples where companies didn't go up into the right, but we stayed on the boards and kind of helped shepherd those companies through. So I think at the end of the day, it's, making founders unbreakable.
I like that. All right, let's go into the fundraising process here. We start with getting in the room. Typically, what we see is a lot of founders at the earliest stages, they start making a list, a CRM. They're trying to think of which funds to reach out to. Any feedback or advice that you'd give founders as they're just even thinking about what type of funds to reach out to? Is there any characteristics or things they should be indexing on as they're making that original list?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that it's easy when you do a kind of a cursor overview of a lot of different investors just to kind of like bucket them on based on like who the firm is or what you've heard about them or different things. I would say that it kind of comes down to three different, I would say three critical kind of categories. Number one is partner fit, right? Especially at the early stage seed, series A, and even series B, right? You're getting the person, the human, not necessarily just the firm logo. And so I'd say always talk with founders who have worked with that individual. I think that's number one. Number two is stage fit, of course, right? Like founders can spend a lot of time just trying to talk with investors that aren't the right stage. And at the end of the day, like, you can save yourself a lot of time by knowing who you're talking to and when. And the last thing is sector fit. And the reason I put it last is because I think in many cases it is really important, but at the same time, like it just really matters who you're working with. That is like the number one thing. So if you can optimize for having the best people around the table, they will move mountains to help you. And so, and in many cases, like, you end up working with generalists or someone else that hasn't spent as much time in your category, and they take a very fresh approach, or they see things in a slightly different way. So, I would say partner fit, stage fit, and sector fit are probably the top three, but there's certainly more I could add.
That's an excellent answer. I think especially on the partner fit side, I think founders forget. They assume it's like, oh, the fund's giving me money, which is true, but the relationship that you are going to have, perhaps for the next decade, is going to be with that partner, trying to find the right individual that's going to champion you and back you and be there when things go poorly, which a lot of times they will be, is something that is very important to try and index with. And the other thing is that podcasts like this, VCs are very good at showing you who they are in a lot of ways. And then when you meet them, they can show you those things too. So do the research and figure out from an individual level who some of those folks might be. How would you recommend folks reach out? So let's say that they see you, Jake, they want to get in front of you. What's the right way for them to get their pitch in front of you?
Okay, so I actually love this question because because I started in sales, I actually care a lot about this. And, many people will say, oh, just find somebody that knows us and like figure that out, whatever. And yeah, that's, of course, that is the best, right? Like I would say lowest priority would be cold message, boilerplate, no context, just like, here's who I am. And that's it. That's going to be very hard. Right? At the end of the day, you're trying to stand out from the noise. Second best would be, here's a cold message, but there's context. It's customized for that particular investor. There's a unique insight. I just think that at the end of the day, you're fighting for their time and fighting for attention. And then of course the best is a warm intro, but I personally will still answer many, many cold messages as long as they're customized, there's context, there's unique insight. And, so I think that alone gives you a sense for how much effort the person is really putting in, because it all comes down to your last point. It all comes down to kind of like relationship, and how you start that relationship off can really impact one way or another.
When you're looking through, somebody is creative or finds a unique way of getting in front of you. Are you looking through pitch decks? Do you like to see memos? Is it a blurb or something in the email that kind of catches your eye? What's that thing as you're getting some of this inbound, or even if it's from a warm intro, before you make the call of meeting with them, you're probably looking for something, or maybe it's multiple things. What are some of those things, and how can founders essentially make those stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about this later too, but I think when we are looking for a spike in something, right? And that could be like, maybe the founder's background is so unbelievable where it's, they were meant to do this. They were meant to start a company in this category. And there's a mantra, be brief, be brilliant, be gone. And it's all about being concise. It's about being impactful and swift. And I mean that because, if you could be brief, customized, have unique insight, I think that's gonna give you a leg up.
Yep, I like that. They have to stand out. Can you say how many pitches or intros do you think that you're getting on a weekly or a monthly basis?
That's a really hard number to quantify.
Hmm.
Weekly, it's in the hundreds probably. Certainly between emails, in mails, cold messages, etc. It's certainly in the hundreds.
Yep. So it's a lot. So standing out and having that spike, to your point, I think is a great way to try to format some of these things. Is there a particular slide in a pitch deck that you think is the most important, and maybe a slide or two that you think founders over-index on that VCs actually don't spend very much time on?
I really like the second part of the question. I think so. I'll start with that. I actually think the part that people over index on or spend a lot of time on is TAM slides. And the reason they do that, I think, is because it's a very academic way of proving, like, the TAM. Essentially what we're trying to understand is, like, we're trying to understand the why now. And I actually think that's the most important slide. Like, chances are, if we're spending any time on this, or if we're meeting, we've certainly researched your background. We know who the team is. So team is very critical, but I think the why now, it's like, is it a real problem? And it also shows how much work and kind of conviction the founder has to prove that this is a real problem. And then again, it all comes down to the unique insight. What founders are doing is they're kind of crafting a new world, and we basically want to be taken along for that ride. And so the TAM slide is, I would say, a rudimentary approach to articulating why there will be market pull. What you're saying is like, yes, there are dollars here, but that's not really telling us, yes, the dollars are here and we can take them for this reason. So I think the why now slide is absolutely kind of the slide, or the set of slides, that I really love, because I think it tells you so much about how the founder has approached the problem, the level of detail and granularity, and their crispness of the vision. And I also think that it just makes you, for great why now slides, frames the future in a way that you haven't thought before.
Like that. Any other common mistakes that you see before we move on to the initial meeting phase? Common mistakes that you see founders make either in the outreach, the introduction, their pitch decks, memos, or anything like that?
I think I'm a big fan of focus. And again, if you don't know, if you wait, this goes back to selecting your investors. If you weight all potential investors equally, then you will spend exactly the same amount of time on all of those investors. I would encourage founders to think through what is your wish list? And then like basically you can even tier the individual investor, not even the firm, but like the individual investors that you want to speak with, tier them and spend your time accordingly. Because I found that many, especially first time founders, they treat all investors kind of equally as it pertains to their own startup. And so they end up spending too much time or not enough time, depending on kind of who they're meeting with.
Yep, that's excellent advice. All right. Going into the initial meeting, it's a very important step of the process. It may only be 30 minutes, but sometimes it's a make or break point in time. As a VC, what are you looking for in those initial meetings when you're meeting a founder for the first time? What do you need to walk away with in order to be excited to continue that process?
Yeah. I mean, every founder can be slightly different, right? But the one thing is, I've never met an exceptional founder that isn't excellent kind of clarity of thought and like drive, right? Because at the end of the day, you're working against the odds kind of start a new company. You're working against competition. You're kind of like convincing the world see your vision. And so I think that those are the two things, but they can be very different in the sense that we're looking for spikes in different areas. And so it could be like mission driven, where this person has only worked in this one category their whole life, and they've spent, from the time they're 8 or 10 thinking about this problem. Or maybe they're just like really charismatic and they have this magnetism and the ability to attract talent unlike nobody else. And I think so. We're just looking for a spike. I think the other kind of to go one level deeper behind, because often we meet with just one founder. We're also looking for um, what is that founding team kind of like? What does that founding team look like? Because there are situations where the founder CEO is very good at something, but then the CTO or whoever the other co-founder is excellent at something else that is equally important and like makes a lot more interesting. So I think that it's all about where they spike, and going back to the why now, articulating that why now. I think like if we were to think about what's a green flag founder trait that gets us excited to invest in, or like, what maybe we're less excited about, I think it's again, how quickly can you get us to see your vision? A lot of times, what a very common mistake that I see is founders will have a ton of experience, but they'll kind of bury the lead in a sense where they say, yeah, we have all of these things, or they assume that the founder or they assume that the investor has the same context as them. And so they kind of just rush into the conversation without coming out from the very beginning, like, let's level set. This is why we're doing what we're doing. And this is like how we're going to get there. And so I think that if we've gotten through 15 or 20 minutes of the meeting and we still don't really understand what makes the company or the team or the approach unique, that critical insight is often very hard to kind of recover. So it's all, again, tying it back to a relationship. It's all about building trust, building credibility, and helping the other person see your vision.
And I think that as we see more and more companies, you mentioned that are building in, manufacturing, robotics, these highly complex, especially hardware. If you're a founder that's highly technical, I feel like that gap is sometimes harder to cross because you feel as though you have to educate the VC on so many things. Not that we don't care about those things, because we do, but oftentimes it's the clarity of why is this important, speaking to us in the most layman way possible, which is really difficult to do.
Yeah, but the best, I mean, that is a good point. And like, especially more technical areas, that's where sector fit does come into play, right? Like you'll hear a lot of people, it could be in cybersecurity, it could be in defense, could be infrastructure. Like if you have to explain just the base level premise of the problem, then it's a little harder to get there, right? Like you need somebody that at least have some level of familiarity. And at the same time, like the best founders have this unique ability to kind of simplify a complex problem that they're solving into a much broader vision.
Yeah, I agree. Are there any other mistakes that you see besides founders not being able to educate the VC or to have clarity in their mission? Any other mistakes like random things? Like, what do they come and they don't have a deck prepared, or they don't know their numbers, or anything that's maybe around those lines that founders just mess up maybe every now and then?
I mean, to the extent you have numbers and metrics, as a founder, you should absolutely know them. But the biggest piece of advice I could give for founders is to try to understand like how the process works for different investors. And what I mean by that is like, if it's a coffee chat, you don't need to show up and just say like, here's my deck and like walk you through every single thing. Uh, Similarly, like if you show up to in person and there's, 4 people from the team, like, yeah, they probably do want to see something more. So just kind of gauging that and coming in at the same level, I think is really helpful for founders and investors to kind of get on the same page. But I think those are probably the two of the things that come to mind.
You know, a couple rapid fire questions that founders were just curious about. You mentioned or hinted at one earlier. What do you feel about bringing the entire founding team on the initial call? Should it be just the CEO, the whole team? Where do you see that line drawn?
I don't have a strong perspective whether, I mean, I think it just really case dependent. So in some situations, the CEO is the face and he'll do everything, and you can very easily kind of articulate all of the benefits, and he can handle any technical question that comes his way. So I think that in many cases the CEO is sufficient, at least for a first call. As you progress, like if it's a full partner pitch, partner presentation, then in many cases, we want to meet the other kind of co-founder or key members of the team. So it really depends where we are in the process, and again, like how comfortable the CEO feels.
That's great. Any questions that you think founders should ask the VCs during this initial meeting? Sometimes it feels a little bit awkward. It doesn't feel like you're in a position of strength as a founder to maybe ask any questions. But maybe at the end, you have a little bit of time. What questions should founders ask VCs in order for them to take control over the process and do this in a proper way?
I'm really glad you asked this. I think that one of the more interesting questions you can ask is, because you want to get a sense for, will this person be there, and like, can I count on this? Again, it's a relationship thing, it's a trust thing, it's a credibility thing. I encourage founders to ask, hey, if you as an investor have pinned conversations in kind of your messaging apps like text, iMessage, Signal, whatever, how many of the founders you work with are pinned at the top? Meaning like, how much do you actually work with your founders? Because I think that that's uh, a very direct way to understand how they view their relationship with the founders. I also think that, again, understanding kind of what they're looking for. It's like the best way to reframe the founder investor relationship. It's not you pitching and trying to convince someone to buy something from you. It's like you're both concurrently trying to feel the other side out and say, hey, is this a fit? And can we run farther, faster together? As opposed to just like, this is a sales pitch, I hope you buy it. And so I would just encourage founders to think more like that, more as a future partner, as opposed to, hey, I just want this person to buy my product and kind of be done with it.
How can founders finish the call maybe in the right way? Maybe there's no right or wrong way, but how do they schedule the next meeting? Do you just end the call? Do you try to schedule it? How do you make sure that there's no loss of momentum without maybe overstepping, being rude, or not handling it the right way?
I mean, I would say this is more of kind of like a stylistic question. It really depends but in general, I would say that for the founder, it's totally fine to ask kind of like what the process looks like. I think more often than not, you'll feel it throughout the meeting. It's similar to when you're talking with customers, right? Or it's like, hey, is there a high level of interest? Like, is everybody engaged? Are we kind of, is there a melding of the minds? Are we seeing eye to eye on this? Or is there, and so I think that a lot of times you get that. I think that it's totally worth it to ask what the process looks like, because founders can spend a lot of time unnecessarily with kind of the wrong types of people. So you want to maximize the amount of time you're spending with the right investors. So I think that's totally a fair question to ask. And then again, anything that can, if you're also looking for, look, we're looking for founders that spike. The founders are also looking for investors that spike in some way. And so I think that like any question that you can ask around those types of things will go a long way and kind of help you be more efficient with your time.
Yep, love it. All right, let's say the meetings are done. You've had a bunch of meetings as a founder, a lot of VCs. You're now kind of in the thick of it where you're really trying to go through diligence, build momentum, add some FOMO where you can, but do it in a delicate way. But maybe taking a step back, could we talk a little bit about what the diligence process looks like from post call to you writing a check? Obviously, it varies from fund to fund, but how do you guys handle that?
Yeah. So this is one of our core things that we really focus on. We ascribe to the two pizza rule. So we manage about 4 billion, but we have an intentionally small investment team. That's not to say that we don't do all the diligence. It's not to say that we kind of shortchange any of that process. Many cases, and we come in with a prepared mind so that we can move faster. But at the end of the day, it's like for us, it's about improved communication, speed of decision making, kind of, and have a more personal feel so that the founder doesn't feel like, hey, they're going to a factory. It's going to be one of many teams, right? And so at the end of the day, it's, do we believe in this founder, in the market, in the approach? There have been scenarios where we came in with a prepared mind. It was a warm introduction, and kind of we already knew the industry. We knew what we were looking for. We went from basically first meeting a term sheet in 24 to 48 hours. I think that we are premise is that founder's time is the most valuable thing. And so one thing that we will not be doing is we will not be just kind of wasting time with tons and tons of meetings. What we also will not keep them on hold for an extended period of time. Like our point is like, you're either in or you're out, and you make the decision very, very quickly.
I think that's unique. And that's one of the things that I've heard from other founders in working with you guys is that you're what I call, I think, conviction investors, which I think is more rare. I would argue that 50% of funds are true conviction investors where they are making decisions on their own rights, what they believe in, and they're going to get conviction and write the check or not. Other VCs or a lot of VCs are waiting for something else outside in the universe to kind of give them the conviction that they need. Sometimes there's a lead or another investor or a fund or a notable fund that joins the mix. But I think that what makes you guys great investors is that you don't necessarily need that, and you're able to move forward with the process at a faster rate. So that's fantastic. So what are some of the things that you would recommend founders do to help build momentum and get conviction to funds that maybe need it? It's a delicate piece because you're oftentimes stretching the truth in like a very delicate way. You should never lie as a founder in these positions because VCs do talk to each other all the time. But what advice would you give founders in this position where they are trying to build momentum, but at the same time, they don't want to overstep or be too pushy or desperate?
I think that the question is really interesting in that I think it comes back to the why now. I think that, in my opinion, if you haven't articulated the why now and why you're the right team to do it or this is at the early stage, kind of, in many cases, like before many metrics are available, pre-revenue, et cetera. I think that in many cases, you then resort to trying to find all these other hacks or asking these other types of questions. At the end of the day, it's how well do you articulate and how accurate do investors find kind of that um, like that premise of your company. I'll give you an example. In many cases, we will come in with a prepared mind. Let's say in cybersecurity, where we're working with, we have a CISO network of over 100 CISOs that we work with, and so we'll meet with a founder, and they'll say, "Hey, I view the future of cybersecurity in XYZ fashion," and then we said, "Okay, that's really interesting," and we have our own opinions. We go and we kind of check with CISOs that this is what the founder's approach is. And if basically it comes back, none of them really agree with that, it's going to be pretty hard to kind of like build that momentum, right? At the end of the day, it's like demonstrating why now is the perfect time and why you're the right team and why this is the right approach.
And if you can do that accurately and you can do that well, VCs will feel that momentum and want to move quickly on your behalf. So it's oftentimes if you can't do that, it's not always the case, but it's that you either haven't nailed the clarity piece there and have been able to convince it, or your business just doesn't have that. There is no why now, which honestly happens a lot more times than founders want to admit.
Yeah, 100%.
Although it's a nice problem to have, founders might become or get into a position where they have multiple VCs that they kind of have to choose from. You kind of hinted at some of these earlier where, picking the right partner in this. But are there any other pieces, is it having a big logo or a notable fund or other things that founders should consider when they're actually making choices to leave people off their cap table or to bring them on? Any advice you give founders that maybe have some options there?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I mean, assuming all things are equal, right? Like all money is green. So assuming that's the same, I think what you're looking for is who will give you the best odds of success, right? And so again, similar to how we look for spikes in founders, they should be looking for how we investors spike for them. And a few things that I would really, if I were a founder, I would look for is like number one is trust, right? If you can't trust a partner that you're going to be in this journey, especially if they're leading or co-leading or going to take an active role, like you're going to be in this for 10, 15 plus years. And so if that's your mindset, like trust is critical for any relationship, you know? And so that's one. Number two is credibility. And so credibility could come in many factors, could be in the sense that credibility could come in the sense of, hey, this person knows my sector cold. They have a ton of relevant connections and they can help me. They know the buyers. It could come in this in the way of like, hey, maybe even if they don't know my sector, maybe they've seen similar types of business or similar stages of business, and they can help me there. And so I think that's one. And then the last I would say is value add. Value add, in my opinion, it comes throughout the relationship, but most of what they're doing most of the value add they're providing will come kind of at the beginning and, at least on the more tactical things like hiring and customer intros and things like that. I think on many of those cases, like there have been situations where, we preempted a company and they had several competing offers, but the reason they chose us was because, A, we understood what they were doing. B, we had built that trust and credibility over time. And C, because we had already made several customer introductions that ended up converting before investing. So they got a sense of this is how it is already to work with Jake or Felicis. And so I think at the end of the day, it's just what's going to add the most leverage dependent on the stage of the company.
And I think going with your gut, because a lot of times during that process, if you're fortunate enough to work with a VC like yourselves that have shown your value before they've written the check, look for those signs and you should be good. Let's say that they've followed all this advice. They've closed their round. It feels like there's a lot of celebration. It lasts maybe 5 minutes. It's a hard thing because I always say that you go from running a marathon and fundraising to then going back to the actual marathon or the multi-marathon. What is some advice you give founders to snap back into the company building after fundraising? And then what are some of the mistakes that you see them make in the first, few months after they close their rounds?
I think it's losing focus. And the reason I say that is because it's very easy to, when you get in this, when you get, at the end of the day, the customer is what matters, right? The customer is, I'm a huge fan of founders that are customer obsessed. But what often ends up happening is when founders are fundraising, they get in this mindset where the customer is the investor. And again, I don't agree with that sentiment totally. And so I think that you can end up over optimizing for what feedback you got from the fundraising process, as opposed to let's just take ground truth data, let's listen to our customers and let's do right by our customers. I think losing focus is kind of one of the biggest things. I also think that like the other common mistake I see founders is just because the round, like even though it's a transaction, they treated it in a transactional way. And what I mean by that is like, this is a relationship. Life is very long, right? You will most likely have several other kind of series or rounds of investing. And so like, I just take a long-term view and focus on your customers, and that will answer, majority of those questions.
How do you typically get involved with the companies right afterwards? What's your expectation on founder updates or how founders can keep you in the loop as after they invest or after you've invested?
I don't have a prescriptive playbook that says, hey, 30, 60, 90 days, this is exactly the thing I'm doing. It really depends on the founder. Our whole point of view is we want to, embedded in our kind of conviction and speed, we want to also enable the founders where they need it. And so for some, it's like, hey, I have this really phenomenal idea and like the strategy portion or like the competitive landscape is shifting such that XYZ thing is happening. How do you think through that? Some it's like, you know what? I want to work with you because I think you can give me good customer intros for the next little bit. Others, it's like, hey, we're going to help you hire. And so I think that like at the beginning, it's probably more tactical, blocking and tackling. Longer term, I think the most valuable thing is just being on speed dial, right? The founders who get the most out of their investors are the ones that are texting before crises happen and not after. And so I think that, again, I think founders will get a lot more if they take that long-term approach to working with their investors.
I like that. It's rare that we have, I think, a VC that's seen so many incredible founders that have started and that have now built incredible generational companies. So I want to ask a question that's more of a feedback from the learnings that you've had from some of these founders that have gone the distance. You said you invested early in companies like Shopify, and it was Canva, I believe, on there. Like Melanie is an incredible CEO. Toby, obviously, incredible CEO over at Shopify. What's some feedback or advice or maybe common patterns that you've seen from some of these incredible founders that even founders listening now at the very early stages can start to apply and build up that pattern matching ability for themselves?
Let me rephrase your question a little bit, which is like common reasons for startup failure. And then I would say that, like, basically do the opposite of this, which is
Exactly.
like the three reasons that we see companies fail most often. It's team, failure to find product market fit, and they simply run out of cash, right? It's like those three things. And so with the team, initially it's the co-founders, and then it shifts to building the executive team and like every single person. So like your first, you'll hear a lot of times the first 5, 10, 15 people on your team matter. They set the tone for the culture, for how the company works, et cetera. So I think that's it. Number 2 is failure to find product market fit. People assume that is, that's like a one and done. That only happens one time and then that's it. The reality is you need to find product market fit repeatedly as a company, as an organization. You're going to launch additional products and things are going to change, right? So right now we're in the midst of this massive AI transition. And like, guess what? Companies that were built, technology companies that were built 20, 30 years ago, they're transitioning to be AI companies. And so I think they're still struggling. Now, obviously have the benefit of distribution already in place, but they're still fighting to find product market fit. So I think that finding product market fit, team is always important. Finding product market fit, it feels like it's a one thing, but it is an evolution. And then running out of cash, there's a delicate balance, and we swing pretty radically between, growth at all costs to, capital efficiency at all costs. And so I think that as a founder, you have to be on top of that. And so I think that those are the things that I would encourage founders to focus on if they're not already.
Amazing. Jake, thank you so much for being on today. We covered a lot in a short amount of time. Where can folks continue to follow you and Felicis and continue along your journey?
Email or warm intro. I'm a sucker for a well-written cold message. Shoot me an email, find a warm intro, but I'm always looking to talk with great people.
Awesome. Jake, thanks again. Hopefully we can chat again soon. And I really appreciate you being on.
Thanks, Matt. Take care.
Bye.
Pitch pass, iterated fast. Story beats data when the storyline's fast. Vision's the ignition, but the numbers steer the ride. Conviction and precision, watch investors collide.